Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are building stock market chart. But here is the thing. We will not be using any of charting libraries and we will not gonna use any of popular web frameworks. Pure HTML, raw SVG and one tiny 10 kilobyte library that makes the impossible effortless. And I'm talking about HTMX. Let's go straight to the code and get started. At the beginning you need to create an empty project and install their Express. So here you can see my package.json file. I have only one dependency here, which is Express. Then we need to create server and one HTML file, which we're gonna serve to the client. Here are the folders. So here in server, we need to create file index.js. That's gonna be our entry point. And here we use that Express, and here we call app listen, here we specify port, and here is just console log just to make sure that server is running. And in public folder we have index.html file, here we have our boilerplate, and here we need to import Tailwind and HTMX. That is the main skeleton of that app. Let's continue from index.js file. So here we need to declare path from path package. And then we need to use that express static path join dir name, and we need to reference here public folder. That creates a middleware function to serve static files. After that line, let's define the default route. So once user go to this port, we're gonna serve to the client index.html file. Let's try it out. Great, we are on the port 3000 and here is our hello world. Perfect. Next step, let's define config module where we're gonna store the default port for our app. Here we're gonna store chart dimensions in the future, and also we have some configuration for our stock chart. We have set here max value, mean value and drift range. Also here we specify sector, what we wanna show on that chart. We're gonna show all, tech, auto, health, retail and finance. And then we need to export this. Then we import that config to index.js file, and here we're gonna use port from this config. Moving forward, then we need to create routes folder, and here let's create file stocks routes.js. Inside that file we have specific create stock router, which contains two endpoints to get requests. One is going to return all the stocks and another one is going to return stock by ID. That create stock router will accept store, config, render chart and render stock details. And before we implement endpoint logic here, we need to add extra functionality in the app. For that I created services folder, and here I created another file and I call it stock store.js. And inside here we will have that hard-coded data for stock chart, and also we will have all functionality related to the operations with the stocks. In that part is self-explanatory. We're gonna store the history of the stock, and that function is actually helps us that stock will not go below minimum or above maximum value. Drift stocks function, it is a kind of simulation engine that helps randomly generate that stock market state. And after that we have our helpers to get stocks, get one stock by ID and get history of the stock also by ID. This is pretty simple functionality. And don't bother that much about this, it's not so important in this demo, this is just to showcase chart properly. Okay, we have that. Let's go back to the roots and then let's implement the logic for our API endpoints. And here is it. So here in get all stocks, first what we do, we call drift stocks just to simulate state of the stock market. Then we get the sector from query of this endpoint. If it is not available, we just set default all, and then we get all the stocks by the sector. But stocks is not what we're gonna return from this endpoint. We need to return a render chart. That's where we're gonna call this render chart. And for single stock, we call here get stock by ID, the same we do for history. And then here we need to call this render stock details and then return that back. It's time to implement that render chart, and for that I created another folder, renderers, and here I created another file, chart.renderer.js. Inside here there are a lot of stuff, and actually for you probably that tags will look a bit weird, but that's how SVG is defined. If you have ever worked with SVGs, or for example you work with a D3.js or other charting library which use SVG, probably you will be familiar with that part. The chart for my demo looks pretty complex. It's 150 lines of code, but actually I didn't spend that much time implementing it. And here is the hint: if you need to create an SVG which will represent your data, for that you can use any of AI assistants. And this is actually the work of ChatGPT. But of course, I reviewed and fixed some parts, but in general, it outputs pretty good result. Let's walk through it pretty quickly. So here we have a function to define the values of our sectors. Then we have render defs function where we rendering gradient for the chart. So basically here we have some styling for the chart. Then we render background as well, part of styling. Then we render the grid for our stock chart. Then we have render axis just to show values there. Then we render the bars itself. And here you see we use rectangle and also we use some animation here. After that we have render of the legend and render of the whole chart, where we include that render defs, render background, grid, axis, bars, and legend. And basically that's it. Also I have updated config, and in that part I just set some default dimensions of the chart. So after we get this, we need to go back to the routes and finish the implementation. That's how the final result in that part should look like. So here we render chart and return it as SVG. And here we return it back from that endpoint. The same happens here, I render stock details, but this one, as you saw, it's not implemented yet. I can keep it to you so you can experiment and play with the app and try to implement that yourself. But here we can return it as HTML, not as a chart, but some HTML element. Let's go back to index.js file, and here we need to add our store. So here we define store and we call that create stock store, and we pass config there. And also we need to pass it here, create stock router, and here we pass store, we pass config, and that render chart function. What's left? HTMX part. So let's do it now. Let's go back to index.html file, and we need to replace this div with our chart. And here is it. We have several divs, but the most important is this one. So here we define ID where we specify chart, and then you can see this weird attributes. What actually they do? So hxget, it actually calls our endpoint stocks just to get all available stocks. HX trigger means that we want to trigger that API call on load. So once element is loaded, then we need to specify the ID where we want to load our content. And for that we use HX target. And here we specify how we want to swap that element. And we say that we fully swap this element with the content we receive. And basically that's it. Also we have here some loading market data loader. So let's take a look at the browser, how actually the result looks. And here is it. So we are on the port 3000. This is how the chart looks. And let's try to refresh it. And you see that on each refresh, the data is changing. That's how this simulation engine works. Let's take a look as well at the network tab. So we see that stocks always triggered, and here in response we have that chart. I have updated a bit index.html, just added more components just to make this app looks like a more or less real app. Let's take a look now at the browser. And here is it. We have header and footer here as well. So here is the chart with some buttons, with the refresh button, which helps us to update the chart. Also here we can select different sectors. Let it be automotive. And then we should press apply filter, and we have that single stock here rendered. And that's briefly how to build charts without charting libraries and without any of web frameworks. I believe that this approach is very good for especially backend developers. If you work on some data and you want to introduce it to the user as soon as possible, I think this is the most simple way to do. HTMX is pretty easy in use, and also you can ask AI assistant to generate for you the best looking chart. And that's it. You have perfect data visualization in the browser without any web frameworks and charting libraries. And by the way, I have a video on my channel where I explain more about HTMX, so if you're wondering how it works, please take a look at that video. I hope this tutorial was helpful and it was easy to follow. If you need a code, just text me in the comments. I will share you the GitHub repository. If you don't want to miss next dev insights, please subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit that like button. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.